What if the homeless man you walked past today was richer than everyone on Wall Street? What if the person you laughed at was actually the one holding the keys to your future? This is not just a story about wealth. It's a story about perception, power, and the quiet strength of a man who chose to be invisible, so he could truly see. Before we dive into this powerful journey through the streets of Chicago, take a second to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring, thought-provoking stories like this one. And when the story ends, we want to hear from you. What would you have done if you were in that park that day? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We read every single one. Now, let's begin. Disclaimer. This story is a work of fiction. Any names, characters, places, and incidents portrayed are purely the product of imagination or used in a fictitious manner. They are not intended to represent or reflect any actual person, organization, or event. This video was created for the purpose of providing moral lessons, motivation, inspiration, and personal growth. Its goal is to encourage reflection, empathy, and a deeper understanding of how our actions shape the world around us. Viewer discretion is advised for those sensitive to themes involving judgment, inequality, or social issues. Thank you for watching, and we hope the message stays with you long after the story ends. In the heart of Chicago, a man in tattered clothes sits quietly on a park bench, invisible to the wealthy passersby who mock him without mercy. What they don't know is that the man they sneer at is a billionaire, one who chooses to walk unnoticed through the city to see people for who they truly are. This is the story of Nathaniel Cole, a quiet visionary with a powerful secret. As he moves through neighborhoods scarred by neglect, he plants more than gardens. He plants hope, opportunity, and change. Through simple acts of kindness, fierce integrity, and a refusal to judge or be judged, Nathaniel reveals the hidden truths of a city and challenges those around him to rethink what it really means to lead, to serve, and to belong. This isn't a tale of revenge or riches. It's a journey through humility, redemption, and the kind of transformation that doesn't need a spotlight. A story where dignity blooms in unexpected places, and where the smallest seed can grow into a legacy. A spring wind drifted through Millennium Park, scattering petals and wrappers across the paved walkways. The murmur of downtown Chicago pulsed in the background. Tourists wandered by, phones in hand, snapping photos of the Cloud Gate. Cyclists pedaled past the flower beds in careful loops, weaving through joggers and stroller-pushing parents. On a weathered wooden bench near the edge of the park, a man sat alone. He wore an old wool coat, several sizes too large, its hem frayed and dulled by time. His shoes bore the uneven wear of long walks and longer days, soles flattened and cracking. A knit cap, faded to a tired gray, clung to his head, casting shadows over a contemplative face. Beside him sat a duffel bag, its fabric worn thin at the seams, bulging with contents unknown. Nathaniel Cole sat with his fingers laced, elbows resting on his knees. He watched the passersby without judgment, his dark eyes tracing the flow of people with the quiet precision of someone who noticed everything but spoke little. He had been coming here for the past 3 weeks, each time at a different hour, wearing the same threadbare clothes, never speaking unless spoken to. Most walked by without a glance. A few spared him a moment of pity. Some tossed him spare change. He never reached for it. Today, the scent of roasted peanuts from a nearby vendor drifted past, mingling with the faint tang of lake water in the breeze. Children laughed as they chased pigeons through the grass, their joy echoing across the green space. Then came the voices, high-pitched, loud, and peppered with laughter that rang with self-satisfaction. A group of young professionals walked toward the central plaza. 5 of them, dressed sharply in tailored suits and silk scarves, their shoes gleaming, their watches catching the sunlight. "Chicago never changes, does it?" said Eli Cartwright, tucking a pair of designer sunglasses into his coat pocket. His suit jacket was navy blue with a satin trim, cut to show off both physique and wealth. "You'd think they'd clear out the riffraff in a place like this." Jessica Lane, whose fame came from curated luxury and soft-lit selfies, wrinkled her nose. "He's just sitting there. Doesn't even have a sign. Probably expects people to guess he needs help." Their laughter spilled into the open air, unashamed. Another in the group, a lanky man with a narrow tie and pointed shoes, made a mocking gesture toward Nathaniel. "Hey old man," he called. "You need $1 or just waiting for someone to hand you a startup?" More laughter. Nathaniel did not look away. He sat perfectly still, head slightly tilted, as though studying a painting from a distance. Jessica pulled out her phone and snapped a photo of the Cloud Gate. Then, without breaking stride, she reached into her purse and flicked a dollar bill toward Nathaniel. It landed on the pavement near his boot, fluttering like a tired leaf. He did not touch it. His eyes shifted slowly from the bill to the group and then back to the horizon. Eli scoffed. Suit yourself, buddy. This city's not gonna feed you for free. Maybe try the west side. They moved on, their chatter rising and falling like a wave, indifferent to the man behind them. 10 minutes passed. Nathaniel remained still. Then, a soft rumble of tires came to a stop near the sidewalk. A sleek black Bentley idled quietly, polished to a mirror shine. From the driver's seat stepped a man in a tailored black uniform, cap in hand, shoes as polished as the vehicle itself. He walked toward the bench with calm precision, his posture straight, his face unreadable. Stopping a few feet away, he bowed slightly. "Sir," he said, voice low and respectful. "Your meeting downtown is ready. Shall we proceed?" Several people turned to look. Nathaniel stood. He moved with the quiet grace of someone unhurried, each motion precise. He picked up the duffel bag and slung it over his shoulder, pausing only to brush something off his coat. Then he turned. The group, still within sight, had paused near the edge of the fountain, noticing the car, the driver, and now the man they had mocked stepping into something they clearly did not expect. Nathaniel's voice was calm as he addressed them. "I often come here," he said. "This city changes its skyline faster than it changes its heart. I find that observing people when they think no one important is watching tells me more than a business card ever could." The group stared. None of them laughed now. Nathaniel gave a faint nod. "I'll be reviewing a proposal later today. It bears some familiar names. I hope, for your sake, that the presentation is more thoughtful than your character." He turned and stepped into the Bentley. The driver shut the door behind him. The car eased into the street and disappeared among the downtown traffic. Back in the park, silence lingered. The wind passed through again, carrying with it the discarded dollar bill, which now skittered down the pavement like a ghost of a moment no one wanted to remember. On the bench where Nathaniel had been, nothing remained but an impression in the wood and the silence he left behind. The city moved on, but the memory of that moment rooted itself deeply in those who had witnessed it. For the man they had judged was not who they thought he was. And now, he was watching from above the glass towers they once believed they owned. In the glass-clad heights of the Loop, the upper floors of the Cole Tower gleamed beneath the afternoon sun. The structure, a 40-story spire of architectural pride, stood as both landmark and mystery. Few knew much about the man behind it. Fewer still had ever met him. Nathaniel Cole's name was whispered in business circles and philanthropic societies like a legend half-told. Some said he had risen from nothing. Others insisted he was old money hiding behind a modest persona. The truth was stranger than both. In the executive penthouse, where the view stretched past Lake Michigan to the horizon, Nathaniel stood by the tall windows, coat removed, his frame dressed now in a dark gray suit. No flash, no logo. Simple lines. Classic tailoring. Power and restraint. The duffel bag sat untouched in the corner of the room. Behind him, the faint tapping of keys echoed through the office. His assistant, Laurel Green, a woman of sharp intellect and unshakable calm, had been typing a report when he walked in. Now she turned to him. "They're in conference room 2, she said, sliding a tablet across the polished surface of her desk. "The pitch team from Halston Partners." Nathaniel's eyes narrowed slightly as he scanned the digital briefing. 3 names stood out. Eli Cartwright, Jessica Lane, Martin Kessler. The same 3 who had laughed at him less than 2 hours ago. He tapped the tablet once. "They don't know who they're meeting with?" Laurel shook her head. "They requested a private meeting with the chair. Didn't bother to research beyond the company's shell. They're expecting an old white man named Charles Danning." Nathaniel's lips curved into a slight smile. "Let them wait 5 minutes longer," he said. "Let them feel the uncertainty." He turned away from the window and strode toward the inner hallway. As he walked, his posture shifted, a presence settling into him like armor. The softness of the park vanished. The man in shabby clothes disappeared. In his place stood Nathaniel Cole, the one they never saw coming. In the conference room, Eli was pacing. Jessica adjusted her lipstick in a compact mirror. Martin scrolled his phone, bored. "I don't get why they're making us wait," Jessica muttered. "We're the ones bringing the opportunity." Eli scoffed. "They'll take the deal. This building practically screams for a boost in profile. We land this partnership and the press alone will triple their brand equity." Jessica nodded, confidence returning. "They'll love the concept. Digital exposure, exclusivity, influencer co-branding. It's all clean, high profit. Plus, our social scores are off the charts." The door opened. A moment of silence followed as Nathaniel entered. He didn't announce himself. He didn't introduce his title. He simply walked to the head of the table, set down a single notepad, and took a seat. The trio hesitated. "I think there's been a mistake," Eli said with a faint frown. "We're waiting for Mr. Danning." Nathaniel's gaze didn't waver. "There is no Mr. Danning." Jessica blinked. "Then who?" Nathaniel leaned forward. "You met me this afternoon. At the park." Recognition swept across their faces like a cold wind. Jessica's jaw fell open. Eli blinked twice. Martin lowered his phone, suddenly interested. Nathaniel's voice remained even, almost gentle. "Before we begin, I want you to tell me what you saw when you looked at me. Not the second time. The first." Silence. No one answered. Nathaniel looked at Jessica. "You gave me $1. Did it make you feel generous?" She flushed. I didn't know that I was worth anything," he finished for her. He turned to Eli. "And you? The man who claims to measure people by their performance. Did my silence bother you, or did it comfort you to believe you were better?" Eli looked away, lips pressed into a line. Nathaniel opened the notepad. A single sheet inside bore a short note in neat handwriting. "I wrote down what I saw in each of you," he said, "when you thought no one was watching. But this meeting isn't about scolding you. This meeting is about truth." Jessica tried to recover her voice. "We came here to offer a brand elevation strategy. It's a solid pitch, Nathaniel. Regardless of how things looked earlier, our team brings results." Nathaniel nodded once. "I'm sure you do. But understand this. I don't invest in people because of their resumes. I invest in who they are when there is nothing to gain. When there's no spotlight." He stood, sliding the notepad shut. "The pitch is over. I won't be funding your project. I won't be recommending your team. But I will be watching what you do next. Because what you choose to become after this moment will determine if you ever deserve a second one." He turned and walked out, leaving the trio in stunned silence, the weight of their earlier mockery settling over them like a curtain of regret. In the hallway, Laurel waited. "They didn't see it coming," she said softly. Nathaniel gave a faint smile. "They rarely do." He didn't gloat. He didn't pause to savor the moment. He simply moved forward, one step at a time, toward another meeting, another life, another mask to wear. Because for Nathaniel Cole, every day brought a new test. Not of his wealth, but of theirs. The wealth of kindness. The currency of integrity. The quiet gold of empathy. And in this city of towers and shadows, he was the one man who never forgot where he came from. The sun began to slide behind the skyline, painting the edges of the city in copper and shadow. From his office, Nathaniel watched the light filter through the glass towers, catching the edges of steel beams and sculpted rooftops like gold-dipped thread. Laurel approached with a quiet knock, holding a leather-bound portfolio. "Your evening schedule," she said. "The board meeting has been moved to tomorrow morning. Tonight, you're expected at the Haven Foundation fundraiser in Hyde Park." Nathaniel didn't answer right away. He stepped back from the window, his hands in his pockets, eyes distant. "Laurel," he said, "how long have you worked with me?" She tilted her head slightly, thoughtful. 6 years this spring. "And in those 6 years, have I ever asked you for your opinion of me?" She smiled faintly. "No, sir. But I've given it anyway." Nathaniel returned the smile, though his remained quieter. "Then give it now." Laurel sat down across from him, folding her hands over the portfolio. "You want people to change," she said. "Not for you. Not for a deal. But because you believe it's possible. You go into places others avoid, wearing what makes people ignore you. And you wait. Watching. Listening." She hesitated, then continued. "But most of all, you believe in redemption. Even when it disappoints you. Even when the people you test fail." Nathaniel exhaled slowly, gaze settling on the softening city. "I grew up 4 blocks from where that fundraiser is being held tonight," he said. "Back then, it was a condemned apartment complex with more rats than residents. I used to sit on the fire escape, watching the lights of downtown and thinking I'd never make it past 25. Laurel's voice was quiet. "What changed?" "An old man who used to run a bookstore out of a garage," Nathaniel said. "He gave me a job stacking books. Never asked where I came from. Just handed me a sandwich and said, 'I think you've got more in you than the streets are willing to see.'" He turned toward her. "Every time I sit on that bench in Millennium Park, I remember what it felt like to be invisible. To be passed over. And I remember that one man who saw me." Laurel stood, smoothing her jacket. "Then maybe tonight is the right time to honor that." Nathaniel picked up the portfolio. Inside were the names of every guest attending the Haven Foundation's gala. Donors, politicians, community leaders. But Nathaniel's attention paused on a different list. One Laurel had added herself. Recent high school graduates from underserved communities. Recipients of the Haven scholarships. Students who would be honored that evening, seated at the very edge of the event. Nathaniel tapped a name with his finger. A 17-year-old girl named Ayanna Tate. First in her family to finish high school. Accepted to Northwestern. She's the reason, he said. Laurel nodded. And there are hundreds more like her. You've already funded most of their tuition. Nathaniel's voice was low, almost reverent. But they don't know my name. They think it came from a board. A silent committee. Isn't that what you want? Laurel asked. To stay invisible? He considered that. Then quietly answered. I want them to believe in themselves. Not in me. An hour later, the ballroom of the Haven Foundation shimmered with gold linens, crystal glasses, and soft jazz. Waiters moved gracefully through the space, trays balanced in white-gloved hands. Guests mingled beneath chandeliers, sipping wine and exchanging practiced smiles. But across the room, near the rear, sat a small table with 4 teenagers. No designer gowns. No polished shoes. Just shy grins, wide eyes, and hands folded tightly in nervous excitement. Nathaniel entered through a side corridor, unnoticed by most. He wore a simple black tuxedo, understated and timeless. He moved through the crowd without drawing attention until he reached the student table. Ayanna Tate stood when she saw him, her eyes widening slightly. You're? She began. He raised a hand gently. Tonight I'm just Nathaniel. Can I sit? She nodded quickly, pulling out a chair for him. As he joined them, the others leaned in, curious and cautious. He asked about their plans, their dreams, their neighborhoods. He listened as they spoke about the pressure, the pride, and the hunger to break cycles no one around them had managed to escape. I don't know how to thank the people who made this possible, one of the students said quietly. Nathaniel smiled. Then don't. Just become someone who does the same for the next person. For an hour he stayed at that table. Unseen by the cameras. Ignored by the socialites. But at that table he was the center of something far more powerful than recognition. After he left, the students were told that the man who sat with them was the anonymous benefactor behind their scholarships. Ayanna clutched her program in both hands, her eyes filling. I knew he looked familiar, she said. He's the guy who used to sit on the steps of the community center. People said he was always just watching. That night, as the ballroom emptied and the city returned to its rhythm, Nathaniel walked alone toward his car, the streets humming softly beneath his feet. He didn't need applause. He didn't need his name in lights. Because his legacy wasn't in the buildings he owned. It was in the lives he chose to lift. The morning after the fundraiser brought a different kind of rhythm. Chicago's streets pulsed with the urgency of a new day, horns blaring, heels clicking on concrete, buses groaning at each stop. The wind was cooler than usual for spring, carrying with it the lake's restless breath. In a modest diner on the south side, the kind with cracked red booths and coffee-stained menus, Nathaniel sat in a corner booth near the window. He wore a plain sweater over a white-collared shirt and a pair of jeans that had seen better days. No one looked at him twice. The waitress, an older woman named Ruby with years etched around her eyes and a gold chain swinging at her neck, approached with a steaming cup of coffee. You're early today, she said, placing the cup in front of him. I like watching the sun rise over the tracks, Nathaniel replied, wrapping his hands around the mug. Reminds me that no matter how fast the city moves, it always starts slow. Ruby chuckled. Poetic as always. You should write a book. Nathaniel smiled. Maybe someday. She leaned in a little. You know, you look just like that man they were talking about on the news last night. That fancy donor from the Haven Gala. Nathaniel took a sip of his coffee. Must have been someone else. Ruby squinted at him for a second, then smiled knowingly and walked away without pressing further. Across the booth sat another man, younger, with a wiry frame and guarded eyes. His name was Devin Mays. He had met Nathaniel months ago outside a job center, where Nathaniel had been sitting on a bench reading a folded copy of the Tribune. Devin had made the mistake of assuming Nathaniel was competition for one of the maintenance jobs being listed that day. When he made a snide comment, Nathaniel had simply responded with, I'm not here to take your opportunity. I'm here to see if you're ready to create one. Since then, Devin had been pulled into something he didn't fully understand. Meetings at odd places. Lessons on investing. Long talks about responsibility. And no handouts. Never a handout. You sure people like me can even be in rooms like that? Devin asked now, nodding toward the window, where a billboard advertising a tech summit blazed bright. Nathaniel stirred a packet of sugar into his coffee. That's the wrong question. Devin frowned. What do you mean? Nathaniel leaned in, his voice low. The question isn't whether you're allowed in the room. The question is, what do you do when you finally get in? Do you shrink? Do you pretend? Or do you bring something to the table that no one else can? Devin looked down, fingers drumming the table. I don't even know where to start. Nathaniel reached into the worn leather bag he always carried and pulled out a small notebook, the kind with scuffed corners and yellowing pages. He slid it across the table. Start by writing down the problems you see in your neighborhood. Real ones. Then write down the names of people who've tried to solve them. See what worked, what didn't. That's how you begin to think like a builder, not just a survivor. Devin flipped open the notebook. The first page had one line, written in Nathaniel's tidy handwriting. Before you change the world, know what breaks your heart. Devin looked up, eyes sharpened by a flicker of something new. Not hope exactly. More like purpose. Nathaniel watched him for a moment, then checked his watch. I have to be somewhere, he said, standing. But I'll see you again. And Devin? Yeah. You don't need a suit to own your future. Just vision. And grit. As Nathaniel stepped outside, the wind met him like an old friend. He walked past rows of closed storefronts, graffiti-covered walls, and a man sleeping beneath an awning wrapped in a wool blanket. He paused, pulled something from his coat, and tucked a folded envelope gently beside the man without a word. Then he walked on. Elsewhere in the city, conversations were beginning to stir. At Halston Partners, the rejection from Cole Tower had sparked more than panic. It had triggered something rarer, reflection. Jessica Lane sat at her desk staring at the media mock-up for a new brand campaign. Her image smiled back at her from the screen. Perfect, polished, hollow. The experience in that conference room gnawed at her. Not because of the lost deal, but because of the man behind the deal. The way he had seen her. Not as a brand. Not as an icon. As a person. She opened a private browser window and searched Nathaniel Cole Philanthropy. Page after page of indirect links. Foundations with no visible donor. Scholarships under shell companies. Community centers with anonymous sponsors. She realized then, he wasn't a mystery. He was a mirror. And she hadn't liked what she'd seen in her own reflection. In another office across the city, Martin Kessler stared at a blank document titled, Do We Deserve the Clients We Seek? For the first time, he couldn't just copy and paste bullet points. The silence demanded honesty. At the diner, Devin still sat with the notebook open in front of him. He picked up a pen and wrote down a single word. Food. Then beneath it, no grocery store within 2 miles. Mom takes 2 buses just to get produce. Last corner store closed last month. He kept writing. Outside, the city pulsed on, unaware of the quiet revolutions beginning in its corners. And Nathaniel Cole moved through it like wind through trees. Unseen. Uncelebrated it. But undeniable. Rain swept through Chicago like a slow exhale that wouldn't end. It wasn't the violent kind that slammed into windows and knocked umbrellas sideways. This was quieter, persistent, the sort that crept into your coat and reminded you of things you'd rather forget. Nathaniel Cole stood at the gates of a weathered building on the city's west side. The old high school, long shut down, still bore its original stone carving above the entryway. The letters had faded, chipped by decades of wind, sleet, and indifference. Franklin Douglas Community Academy. It had once been a proud place, full of music, laughter, and promise. Now the windows were boarded up, the playground behind it cracked and overtaken by weeds. But today the locks had been removed. Inside, voices echoed through the once abandoned halls. Tools clanged. Floors were being stripped. Paint peeled from the walls like curled skin. And at the center of it all stood Marisol Vega, her boots planted in a puddle of drywall dust, a hard hat perched on her head. You're late, she said without looking up. Nathaniel smiled faintly. You're still here. Marisol turned, eyes bright under the flicker of temporary lighting. You think I'd leave this place without seeing it rise? They had met years ago when Nathaniel first began scouting buildings in forgotten neighborhoods. Marisol, a city architect turned grassroots activist, had been working with local youth, teaching design and structural repair to teenagers who had never seen blueprints before. She had no patience for excuses and less tolerance for people who showed up late with promises. But Nathaniel had offered something she hadn't expected: quiet commitment. He had funded their tool inventory, their workshops, their permits, all without putting his name on any of it. Now, the two walked slowly through the gutted building, stepping over extension cords and talking beneath the steady rhythm of rain against the temporary roofing. "We'll have the science lab ready in 2 weeks, Marisol said. "Then we bring in the pilot tech program. Coding, robotics, digital storytelling." Nathaniel nodded. "And the mentors?" She smirked. "You're looking at them. A few of your scholarship kids are coming back to teach." They stepped into what had once been a library. The books were long gone, but the shelves remained, ghosts of curiosity. Marisol stopped. "You ever think about why you do this?" she asked. "All the time." "And the answer's always the same?" He looked around the ruined room, saw flashes of what could be, students hunched over laptops, a boy reading to his little sister in the corner, sunlight through clean windows. "No," he said softly. "The answer changes. But the need doesn't." Outside, Devin May stepped off the number 36 bus and stared up at the building with wide eyes. He clutched his notebook under his jacket, now damp from the rain. Marisol spotted him through the window and waved him in. He hesitated at the door, wiping water from his face, his shoes tracking mud across the floor. When he saw Nathaniel, his steps slowed, then steadied. "You said to find a problem," Devin said. "I found one." Nathaniel gestured to the open space around them. "Then this is where you start." Devin looked uncertain. "I don't know the first thing about buildings." "You'll learn," Marisol said, handing him a rolled-up blueprint. "But first you carry the weight. Sandbags, drywall, paint buckets. The same way the rest of us did." She looked at Nathaniel. "Fair?" He nodded. Devin took the blueprint and followed her down the hallway, his steps awkward but determined. As Nathaniel turned to leave, he paused in the doorway of a classroom that still had a single desk in it. He walked over, brushing dust from the surface. Carved into the wood were the initials R.H. He remembered that kid. Ramon Howard. Sat in the back row. Wrote poems when no one was watching. They used to call him Soft Howard. He vanished after freshman year. Rumors said he was in jail. Nathaniel never found out. That was the thing about the city. It never gave you full stories. Just chapters. Interrupted and unresolved. But standing there, Nathaniel made a quiet vow. If he couldn't rewrite the past, he could at least give the next chapter a better setting. That evening, news broke on the local feed. Franklin Douglas Academy to be rebuilt as a state-of-the-art community learning hub. Anonymous donor funds full redevelopment. The media speculated. Was it the city? A tech company? A local nonprofit? Nathaniel turned off the television in his modest apartment, pulled out a folder from the drawer, and checked the next site on the list. An old recreation center in Bronzeville. Closed since 2003. Full of potential. Full of dust. But before that, he scribbled a note in his worn notebook. "Devin, don't rush his story. Just keep showing up." Then beneath it, "Some walls are meant to be torn down. Others rebuilt. Know the difference." As the rain finally let up and the streets exhaled steam into the night, Nathaniel leaned back in his chair, quiet and content. No applause. No spotlights. Just another day building something no one else thought was possible. Downtown Chicago buzzed beneath a glass-gray sky. Traffic moved like a slow, grinding river, and the hum of the elevated trains above threaded through the rhythm of impatient footsteps on concrete. The city's richest towered in sleek buildings made of steel and tinted ambition, while those left behind drifted in the shadows of scaffolding and plans they were never part of. On the top floor of Halston Partners, the boardroom gleamed like a trophy case. Marble floors. Chrome accents. A table so polished it reflected the overhead lights like a pool of still water. Jessica Lane sat at one end, her phone face down beside a crystal glass of mineral water. The screen had lit up several times in the last 5 minutes, each time with a message she chose to ignore. At the other end, Martin Kessler paced. He was the kind of man who didn't sit unless he had an audience. But today there was no applause. Just silence, thick and expectant. "We've gone over this," Martin said, his voice clipped. "We clean up the proposal, smooth out the optics, and present it again. He'll come around." Jessica tilted her head. "You think Nathaniel Cole was concerned about our pitch's optics?" Martin scoffed. "Everyone's concerned with optics." She stood slowly, walked to the window. The skyline glimmered in its cold confidence. "He wasn't," she said. Martin frowned. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," she turned to him. He looked at us and saw through everything. The pitch. The numbers. The language we used. It wasn't just about the deal. Then what was it about? Jessica didn't answer right away. She walked back to the table and retrieved her phone. After a moment, she turned the screen toward him. A paused video played on it. Grainy security footage. A city park. A man in shabby clothes sitting quietly on a bench. Around him, the scene unfolded. Laughter, stares, a group of young professionals standing nearby and pointing, clearly mocking him. One of them was Jessica. Another was Martin. It was footage from 2 weeks ago. "I had this sent over by someone who works with the park's community oversight committee," Jessica said. "I wanted to see the moment again. Wanted to look at myself without the filter of ego." Martin leaned forward. His voice hardened. "You're telling me this is why he rejected our firm? Because of a random encounter in a park with some vagrant?" "He wasn't a vagrant," she said quietly. "He was Nathaniel Cole." Martin froze. Jessica tapped the phone. The clip resumed. Seconds later, a black car pulled up. A driver stepped out and opened the door. "Sir," he had said. Right before Nathaniel stood, shook the dirt from his sleeves and stepped inside. Jessica sat down again, folding her hands. "He was testing us," she said. "He wanted to see how we treat people when we think no one important is watching." Martin turned away, rubbing his jaw. "So what do we do now?" "We start by telling the truth," Jessica said. Martin turned to her with disbelief. "You want to admit we mocked a billionaire and then tried to win his business?" "No," Jessica replied. "I want to admit that we mistook wealth for worth. And worse, we showed our clients that cruelty is acceptable when it wears a smile." Martin shook his head, already reaching for the spin. "We can reframe the story. Play the underdog angle. Say we were misled, that we didn't recognize him." Jessica stood again. "That's the problem. We only treat people with dignity when we think they have power." There was a pause, then the sharp ping of an elevator arriving. A moment later, Laurel stepped in. Her poise was unmatched, clipboard in hand, coat unbuttoned at the collar. "Mr. Cole sent me to retrieve a document," she said without preamble. "His legal team requires the final copy of the non-disclosure clause you submitted." Jessica handed it over without a word. Laurel lingered at the door. "You should know," she said, glancing at Jessica. "He didn't walk away from the deal because of your pitch. He walked away because the person he saw in the park didn't match the person he met in the boardroom." Jessica's jaw clenched slightly. "I know." Laurel gave a small nod. "Maybe next time, don't sell the version of yourself you think people want. Just be the one worth knowing." Then she left. The room was quiet again, save for the distant rush of the city below. Meanwhile, across town, Nathaniel stood on the sidewalk in Bronzeville, facing the next chapter of his quiet work. The rec center was worse than expected. Mold on the ceilings. A broken lock on the front gate. But he wasn't alone. Devin stood beside him, gloves on, a tarp slung over his shoulder. "I brought a few friends," he said. Behind him, 3 teenagers approached, carrying toolkits and buckets of supplies. Nathaniel simply nodded. No speeches. No grand gestures. They entered together, the darkness inside giving way to the promise of new light. And just before the door closed, a gust of wind swept through the street, lifting old flyers, scattering leaves, and brushing against the worn bricks of the building like a whisper. In every corner of the city, the weight of wealth and the illusion of status were being undone. And beneath it all, something real was rising. The gala at the Chicago Museum of Art was the kind of event that softened even the sharpest egos. Held beneath towering marble columns and gold chandeliers, it drew a crowd of the city's elite, each one gliding between exhibits and conversation like dancers in a silent ballet. Waiters in black suits floated through the room with trays of champagne and delicate hors d'oeuvres. Every word spoken hovered just above a whisper. Every laugh was carefully measured. Even the paintings on the wall seemed to lean in and listen. Jessica Lane walked in wearing a deep burgundy gown that brushed the floor with each step. Her hair was pulled back, her earrings subtle. She'd been invited months ago when Halston Partners was still riding high. But tonight she didn't come to pitch. She didn't even come to be seen. She came to look. The city's most powerful faces were all in attendance. Legacy bankers, fashion moguls, politicians with carefully crafted smiles. She walked among them like someone newly awakened, seeing the faces behind the masks. And then she saw him. Nathaniel stood near the far end of the main hall, not far from a sculpture of a broken crown. He wore a midnight black suit, understated, perfectly tailored. His shoes were polished but scuffed at the edges, like he'd walked a long way before arriving. There was no spotlight on him. No announcement of his presence. But people noticed. Not because he demanded attention, but because he didn't chase it. Jessica moved slowly toward him, her heels clicking on the marble like a metronome counting down the moment. He turned before she reached him. Their eyes met. "Mr. Cole," she said, her voice even. "Ms. Lane," he replied. She hesitated, then offered a small nod. "You were right." He didn't pretend to misunderstand. "I didn't say anything that wasn't already clear," he said. "You just hadn't looked at it from the outside." She looked past him at the sculpture behind him. The crown was fractured, split through the center like a cracked bowl. Beneath it, the artist's plaque read "Power Undone." "I wanted to win," she said softly. "Wanted it so badly I forgot to ask why." Nathaniel tilted his head slightly. "And now?" "I still want to win," she said, eyes steady. "But not at the cost of what I almost lost." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Music drifted faintly from the adjacent hall. A quartet playing something classical, warm and aching. "I started over," she continued. "Stepped back from my firm. Started consulting with a youth incubator in Englewood. It's not glamorous. Half the time we're fighting to get funding. But..." She trailed off. "It's real," Nathaniel finished for her. She nodded. He studied her for a moment, then reached into his jacket and pulled out a plain envelope. "No name on this," he said. "But inside is a contact. A woman who runs a tech cooperative in Oakland. She started it after the city failed to provide digital resources to her neighborhood. She builds with intention." Jessica accepted the envelope. "Thank you." Nathaniel offered a slight smile. "Don't thank me. Just pass it forward." A voice interrupted them. "Sir, excuse me," Laurel said, her posture respectful but urgent. "They're ready for you upstairs." Nathaniel turned toward the grand staircase where a smaller, quieter reception was underway. It was for a council reviewing urban development grants, programs Nathaniel had funded from the shadows for years. He turned back to Jessica. "Keep walking forward, Ms. Lane. You've got more to build than you realize." She watched him walk away, the envelope in her hand warm with purpose. Elsewhere in the museum, Martin Kessler stood alone near a painting of a cracked sidewalk blooming with wildflowers. He had read about it before coming. Reclamation was its title. He stared at it now, unsure if it comforted him or accused him. He had stayed at Halston, but something had changed. He had changed. The calls weren't answered as quickly. The meetings felt hollow. And his reflection in the office windows no longer looked like someone he admired. Still, he had come tonight. Not to network. Just to watch. And maybe to listen. Outside the museum, the city had grown quiet. Rain had passed through earlier, leaving the streets damp and shining beneath the lights. On a nearby bench, a homeless man wrapped in a thin blanket slept soundly, his breath fogging the air. A block away, Devin Mays walked with a backpack slung over one shoulder. He passed the museum without looking up, headed toward the train. Inside his pack was a printed outline for a business plan. A small garden project for youth in South Shore. Food and dignity. Roots and direction. Back in the museum, Nathaniel stood before a long table lined with city planners, neighborhood organizers, and educators. They were mid-discussion when he arrived. "Mr. Cole," the lead planner said, adjusting her glasses. "Thank you for joining us. We were just talking about your latest proposal for community-owned housing." He took a seat, opened his folder, and began. No show. No performance. Just the sound of someone who had walked the streets, sat on the benches, listened to the broken systems and the beating hearts inside them. Echoes of his presence began to move through the city. Not because of who he was, but because of what he built quietly, consistently, and with purpose. The sun had just started to rise, casting soft gold across the south side, when Nathaniel stepped off the sidewalk and into the vacant lot behind St. James Church. The grass was uneven and wild, growing in patches where broken bricks and buried bottle caps used to rule. An old basketball hoop leaned sideways on a cracked post near the fence. But the land had promise. Not in the way investors meant, but in the way mothers did when they looked at their children and saw tomorrow instead of today. Devin was already there. He had a rake in one hand, a coffee in the other, and mud on his shoes. "You're late," he said, grinning. "I'm old," Nathaniel replied. "It evens out." They shared a quiet laugh. The kind that didn't need to fill the air to feel complete. Behind them, a small group of teenagers began arriving in pairs. Some carried shovels. Others held seed packets, rakes, trash bags, and small planters they decorated themselves. They were loud, clumsy, full of energy that bounced against the fence line and back. "All right," Devin shouted, clapping his hands. "Grab your stations. Group A, you're clearing debris. Group B, we're tilling this side. And Group C, y'all got compost duty." Groans and jokes followed, but everyone moved. Nathaniel watched as one of the girls, no older than 14, set down her tools and stared at the back wall of the church. On it, a mural had been painted in faded colors years ago, children holding hands rising above a field of sunflowers. She walked up and traced one of the painted petals with her fingers. "Do you know who painted that?" she asked. Nathaniel stepped beside her. "A group of kids like you," he said. "Back when I was your age." She looked up at him. "Are you from here?" "I'm from a lot of places," he said. "But this one stuck." "Why?" He looked out at the lot where the others were working. Laughter rang through the air. Someone yelled about worms. Another shouted back about not being scared of dirt. "Because this was the first place I saw something grow," he said. Even when everyone said it couldn't. Later that morning, Marisol arrived in her pickup, the back loaded with lumber and supplies. A small banner had been rolled up in the passenger seat. It read, "South Roots Garden. Our soil. Our story." They unrolled it together and hung it on the fence facing the street. Passing cars slowed. A few pedestrians stopped and stared. Some smiled. Some just nodded and moved on. But all of them saw it. By noon, the lot had transformed into something more than potential. Raised beds were taking shape. Soil had been spread. Paint had touched old benches. And in the center of it all, someone had built a simple circular path of stones, like a compass without letters pointing outward in every direction. Nathaniel walked it slowly, each step a reminder of every foot he had placed in the quiet corners of a city that tried so hard to forget its own neighborhoods. Just then Laurel arrived, dressed plainly, holding a small brown bag. She handed it to him. "Lunch," she said. "From Mrs. Cora. She said if you skip meals again, she's taking your keys." Nathaniel chuckled. "She's always been dramatic." "She's always been right," Laurel said. "And she says the block down on Jefferson is ready for the meeting. You'll want to see it. The mural's finished." "I'll be there after this," he said. She started to leave, then paused. "They called again," she added. "Who?" "The mayor's office. And the media. They want a quote. A photo. Something they can put on the record." Nathaniel looked around. At the kids pulling weeds with music playing from someone's phone. At the girl with the sunflower mural behind her. At Devin and Marisol arguing over where to plant the tomatoes. "Tell them I'm busy," he said. Laurel smiled, almost proud. "Will do." She left him with the bag in a breeze that smelled like earth and new beginnings. As the day stretched on, the sun climbed higher. A few more volunteers came. A man from the block brought old milk crates and turned them into garden stools. An elderly woman brought lemonade in mason jars. And the boy who once mocked Nathaniel in the park walked past the gate and stopped. He stared for a long time, then stepped in. No one turned to watch him. No one made it a moment. He picked up a shovel, looked at Devin, and raised his hand. "Where do I go?" Devin pointed to the compost pile. "That way. Hope you don't mind smelling like lunch leftovers." The boy shrugged and joined the group. Nathaniel sat on the bench, opened the lunch bag, and took a bite of Mrs. Cora's fried catfish sandwich. Tasted like memory and home. The city still roared in the distance. Still towered in chrome and glass. But here, beneath it all, something real was taking root. Not for press. Not for profit. But for people. For dignity. For tomorrow. Evening stretched across Chicago with the soft hush of a lullaby. Streetlights flickered to life, casting long shadows that draped the sidewalks in amber. In Bronzeville, the South Roots Garden had settled into stillness, its soil dark and watered, its edges ringed with hand-painted signs by the kids who now called it theirs. Nathaniel stood by the gate, sipping from a paper cup of coffee gone lukewarm. His eyes watched the city breathe, cars slowing down, windows lighting up, dogs barking in fenced yards. Each sound reminded him of the layers hidden behind the noise. The people. Their stories. The truths whispered between headlines and hashtags. Laurel walked up beside him, arms crossed, face thoughtful. "They printed it," she said, nodding toward the folded newspaper in her hand. Nathaniel took it. The front page held a photo of the garden. But there was no picture of him. Just the banner, the children, and a quote beneath it. "We rise together, or we do not rise at all." He handed the paper back, nodding. "They'll forget the image faster this way." "But not the message," Laurel said. For a moment they stood without speaking. Then a black SUV rolled up quietly along the curb. The door opened and a sharply dressed man stepped out. His suit was gray, pinstripe polished. He looked like he belonged in a skyscraper, not a garden. Nathaniel straightened. "That's Leonard Chase," he said. "Senior partner at Wyland Equity." Laurel narrowed her eyes. "What's he doing here?" Leonard approached with hesitation, wiping sweat from his brow. He wasn't used to walking on grass. "I wasn't sure you'd take the meeting," he said. "I didn't agree to a meeting," Nathaniel replied. Leonard offered a small laugh. "Right. Fair. I wanted to see it. With my own eyes." He looked around. At the mural, the planters, the signs. "This is different," he said, struggling to find the word. "It's necessary," Nathaniel answered. Leonard nodded. "The board wanted me to extend another offer. A real one this time. Equity, long-term community development, no forced relocation. We even brought in local planners. We're not trying to own it. Just help fund it." Nathaniel tilted his head. "Because it's good business? Or good press?" Leonard hesitated, then said, "Because the future is happening here, and we don't want to be the ones who missed it again." Nathaniel stared at him for a long time. "Leave the paperwork with Laurel," he said. "We'll look it over." Leonard sighed in relief. "Thank you." As he turned to go, he paused. I was there, you know," he said over his shoulder. "That day. At the park. I was one of them. The ones who laughed." Nathaniel didn't reply. Leonard looked down. "I didn't know who you were. But that's the point, isn't it?" Nathaniel's voice was quiet. "That's always been the point." Leonard nodded and left, his footsteps awkward on the gravel path. As the car pulled away, Devin appeared behind them, brushing dirt from his palms. "Suit guy looked like he walked into the wrong movie," he said. Nathaniel smiled faintly. He might have just walked into the right one. Night took hold fully now, and one by one, lights flickered on around the garden. String lights. Solar-powered path markers. A soft glow that turned the space into a beacon. They sat for a while, Nathaniel, Laurel, and Devin, sharing silence the way only people who trusted each other could. Then Laurel stood. "There's one more thing," she said. "From the boy. The one who mocked you in the park. He came by earlier." She pulled a folded note from her pocket and handed it over. Nathaniel opened it. The handwriting was jagged, unsure, but the words were clear. "I didn't know who you were. But I should have known who I was supposed to be. I want to help. Even if it's just cleaning up." Nathaniel closed the note, holding it like something fragile. "You going to let him in?" Devin asked. Nathaniel didn't answer. He didn't need to. The gate was never locked. Later that night, after the others had gone, Nathaniel stayed. He sat on the edge of the planter box, the sky above scattered with stars and a waxing moon. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small photograph. Faded. Frayed at the edges. It was him as a child, standing in front of this same lot when it was still wild and broken. A man beside him, older, with the same eyes. His uncle. The one who taught him how to plant seeds and listen. Nathaniel looked at the photo for a long time. Then he folded it back into his pocket and stood. The wind moved through the trees with a hush, brushing across the soil like a lullaby, and the garden dreamed on. Morning spilled into the city with the promise of something unspoken. The streets of Chicago glistened from an early drizzle, the buildings reflecting light like mirrored memories. In the quiet lull between rush hour and afternoon bustle, Nathaniel stood before the old barber shop on 43rd and Cottage Grove, its sign faded but proud. Inside, the hum of clippers and scent of sandalwood greeted him. The bell chimed as he stepped in. "Look what the rain dragged in," called Reggie from the second chair, a comb in one hand, a razor in the other. "You finally here to clean this mop?" Nathaniel chuckled, settling into the first seat. "Just a line-up today. Gotta keep the myth alive." The shop had been a fixture in his life. Not for the haircut, but for the conversations. Politics. Progress. Here, a man's dignity wasn't measured by his shoes but by how he treated the person sweeping the floor. As Reggie worked, Nathaniel stared at his reflection. The salt in his beard had spread since the last time. His eyes held more weight but also more peace. He looked like a man who had seen storms and learned how to plant gardens after them. "You hear about that new grant?" Reggie asked, nodding at the mirror. "Word is it's gonna change the game. Community-led. No strings." Nathaniel didn't smile, but the corners of his eyes creased slightly. "That's so." "Yeah. Started on the south side. Now it's catching fire across the whole city. People are waking up." He finished the cut, dusted Nathaniel's neck, and handed him a warm towel. Nathaniel stood, handed over cash, and added extra. "For the next walk-in who can't pay." Reggie gave a knowing look. Same old Cole. Outside, Nathaniel walked without urgency. Every street had a memory. The store where he bought his first notebook. The bench where his uncle told him never to let poverty define his worth. The corner where a stranger once handed him an umbrella and said, "We all gotta cover each other sometimes." When he arrived at the South Roots Garden, he found a small crowd gathered at the gate. Jessica Lane stood among them, dressed simply, clipboard in hand. A mother beside her carried a child on her hip. A man in a mechanic's jumpsuit leaned on a shovel. Marisol was organizing the supply bins. Devin handed out fresh gloves. The garden was no longer just a patch of reclaimed land. It had become an ecosystem. A breathing, beating space of possibility. Today they were breaking ground on the education pavilion. A small wooden structure with benches, white boards, and a roof to keep the rain out. It would host after-school tutoring, workshops, financial literacy classes, small town hall meetings that the city never had room for elsewhere. Nathaniel walked through the gate. Cheers rose. Not loud, not orchestrated, just the natural reaction of people acknowledging presence and purpose. Jessica approached with a soft smile. "We raised the rest of the funds. 2 anonymous donors pushed us over the line." Nathaniel raised an eyebrow. "Anonymous, huh?" She shrugged. One signed the note, a believer. The other just wrote, "For my younger self." Nathaniel nodded. Both sound like good people. They shared a glance filled with unspoken history. Across the lot, Laurel stood near a delivery truck, clipboard in hand, her phone buzzing in her pocket. She ignored it. This was more important. By midday, the pavilion's frame had taken shape. Music played from a Bluetooth speaker. Children painted wooden signs. A young girl with glasses too big for her face climbed onto a milk crate and began reading poetry aloud, her voice steady, her hands shaking only slightly. And then came the sound of footsteps. From the edge of the lot, walking slowly toward the gate, came a group of men and women in crisp business suits. But there was no arrogance in their stride. No condescension in their gaze. These were city officials, planners, developers. One of them was the mayor herself. The crowd quieted. The mayor stepped forward, her heels sinking just slightly into the soft ground. "We weren't invited," she said. "But we came to listen." Nathaniel looked at her. Really looked. She wasn't here to steal headlines. She had seen the photos, read the reports, watched how this project, once mocked, had reshaped the blueprint of what community power looked like. "Then listen," he said simply, stepping aside. Jessica took over, walking them through the garden, introducing the team, the children, the families, explaining what it meant to plant seeds where others only saw ruin. At no point did Nathaniel take the spotlight. By evening, the mayor asked to say a few words. She did carefully, humbly. Then she turned to the group and added, "This is not a pilot. This is a pattern. And the city intends to support it." Applause followed. Some clapped with hesitation, others with conviction. But it wasn't about the clapping. It was about the soil, the hands in it. The future's being written with shovels and paintbrushes and poetry and fresh tomatoes growing from forgotten cracks. That night, after everyone left, Nathaniel remained behind. He walked the perimeter, checked the tool shed, locked the back gate. Then he returned to the center. There, on a new plaque embedded into the stone path, were the words, "In honor of those who saw more than what was missing, who looked past the clothes, the titles, the noise, and chose to build anyway." He sat beside it, exhaled, and let the quiet of the garden wrap around him like a blanket. In the distance the city pulsed. But here, beneath the stars, Nathaniel Cole, once mocked, once invisible, sat as himself. No disguise, no performance, just a man who listened. And in listening, had helped an entire city remember how to hear again. Here are 7 moral lessons drawn from this story. 1. Never judge by appearance. Nathaniel, dressed in shabby clothes, was overlooked and mocked by those who assumed his value was tied to his looks. The story reminds us that dignity and worth are not worn, they're lived. People may carry entire worlds within them that cannot be seen at first glance. Judging someone based on surface-level cues can blind us to wisdom, power, and potential that lives quietly behind humility. 2. Character is revealed in how we treat the unseen. When people believed Nathaniel was a nobody, their true nature emerged: mockery, arrogance, or indifference. But those who treated him with respect, regardless of how he looked, proved themselves to be grounded in integrity. This shows that real character isn't displayed when we meet people of status, but in how we treat those with none. 3. Leadership does not need a stage. Nathaniel's power came not from his wealth, but from his quiet consistency, his listening ear, and his willingness to serve. He led by example, not by command. True leadership is not about control or applause. It's about lifting others, especially when no one's watching. For communities can heal themselves when given a chance. By planting a garden, sharing resources, and mentoring the young, Nathaniel helped people rediscover their own agency. The story teaches us that solutions don't always come from above. With respect, tools, and trust, everyday people can build something lasting together. Real change grows from the inside out. 5. Forgiveness makes space for redemption. Even those who mocked Nathaniel or dismissed his efforts were later welcomed into the fold. Some with apologies, some with silence and sweat. The story shows that allowing people to grow past their mistakes is part of building a better future. Growth requires grace. 6. We rise by lifting others. The garden didn't just feed people, it reconnected them. It gave youth a place to belong, offered elders a chance to pass on wisdom, and showed the city that prosperity doesn't always come from profit. The story's heart beats with a truth. Our progress is deeply tied to how we include and uplift one another. 7. Legacy is built quietly. Nathaniel never chased fame. He didn't seek credit. His legacy wasn't his name on a building, but the lives he helped change. The garden. The note from a young man who had mocked him. The child reading poetry out loud. These were his monuments. The story teaches us that true impact rarely makes headlines. It's found in the quiet, daily work of showing up with purpose. Thank you for watching and listening to this story. We hope it touched your heart, stirred your thoughts, and reminded you of the quiet power of kindness, humility, and dignity. If the journey of Nathaniel Cole inspired you, we invite you to explore more stories like this on our channel, stories that speak to the soul and carry lessons worth holding on to. Please take a moment to like this video if it moved you, and consider subscribing so you never miss another powerful tale. We'd also love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and share what part of the story meant the most to you. Until next time, stay grounded, stay kind, and keep believing in the beauty of unexpected.